Hi everyone, I'm here to present on this PowerPoint an intervention that has been not widely used but has been researched. It's entitled Self-Management Intervention with Children Diagnosed with Autism. I will do an article review, discuss some of the benefits of using a self-management strategy, and I also provided additional resources that I thought would be beneficial for all that are out in this field and working with parents and understanding and keeping up on the latest issues that actually occur in the special education field and working with children with all disabilities. Okay, the methods. How did I find the articles? How did I do the research for this? Well, searching for the articles on self-management interventions and early interventions was very interesting. There were a few studies that just have had subjects under the age of 6 that focused on this particular intervention. I took time looking through the reference section of many articles relating to early intervention and self-management and the campus library. I searched for subjects that were between the ages of 3 and 6 years of age, recent studies, and they were slim, but I did find some. And I also was looking for a particular design, which was the ABAB design. The study did represent a functional relationship between the independent and dependent variables during the treatment and the intervention phases, with the verbal command and the token system set up to reward correct responding. There was a 75 to 100% inter-observer agreement of sharing and 100% inter-observer agreement for the implementation of the treatment package. The takeaway highlights from this study is that all the participants were the same age. The students had preference of the toys they wanted to socially exchange. A token system had been established prior to the study. The room was organized in the same manner, and the study took place exactly at the same time, even though there was one participant sessions were conducted within his home with a home therapist. All the participants in the study did demonstrate the ability to use the self-management and intervention to engage in social interactions with others. This study did yield some limitations, however, in terms of self-reinforcement of when tokens were taken, freely taken, and when they were earned. Throughout parts of the study, 2 of the subjects took tokens even though sharing didn't occur, and the tokens were not taken away by the experimenter. There was also a time when the experimenter had to intervene when 2 subjects tried to put the tokens in his mouth. So 2 variables in the study did change. 2 variables were changed during the non-contingency treatment, and the person delivering the stimuli also changed. The teacher made the tokens available during the treatment conditions, and the students took them during the contingency treatment. So there was kind of a blurred result from that. But in all, they did manage to learn how to use self-management strategies as an intervention to socially interact and held themselves accountable for their correct behavior. So that was a plus, and that was something that was needing to be talked about. Okay, the article was entitled Self-Management of Sharing in 3 Preschoolers with Autism. The definition, according to Skinner in 1953, he said that self-management is a series of procedures by which an individual monitors and alters his or her behavior. And we see that a lot of time when we're working with children with not just autism, but with other disabilities, you self-manage your behavior. You want something, and this is the contingency. If I do this, then I'll be rewarded getting that. If I don't do this, then I will not get the reward. So by using this self-management strategy, it kind of makes the person not only responsible, but it makes them cognizant of all the behaviors that they're using at all times. When trained properly, Self-management strategies can be a good thing, not only just for children with autism, but in other sectors when you're working with children with other disabilities as well, because accountability is the key. So, like I mentioned before, there was one student that did have his sessions conducted in his household, and that was Stan. He was a 4-year-old with which tested with a mild range and spoke fluently. Jack tested in the moderate range and he spoke 1 or 2 word utterances, as well as Paul. He also tested in the moderate range and he spoke 1 or 2 word utterances. And their studies were conducted within the preschool classroom with an experimenter. Okay, let's look at some of the percentages. Because remember, I don't know if I hit on this, but I'm going to tell you the purpose of the study was to teach practical play and social skills to preschoolers. And I already mentioned that there were 3 boys. They were all the age of 4, Stan being the more mature and one that had a little milder range of autism. He spoke with words, and his study was conducted within his household with his younger brother, and he was trained on how to share toys with his younger brother. Jack and Paul setting was at preschool. It didn't specify whether Jack and Paul and Stan actually all were students at the preschool. But at any rate, Jack and Paul both were students at this particular preschool. Well, if you look at Stan in his first non-contingent trial, he had 20 to 30% of compliance of what was asked for him in regards to self-management. The students were asked to take a token once they socially interacted with another student, and once they received 5 tokens, then the trial was stopped right then before a self-management actual trial began. And he had 20 to 30% during the non-contingent first trial. During the self-management of him taking the tokens, it was 60 to 100% with very minimal prompting, verbal prompting. The second non-contingent session, it was 70 to 100%. And the last self-management trial, he was actually socially interacting and taking tokens with a 30 to 6%. Paul and Jack, they were kind of on the same wavelength when it came to the non-contingent first trial. During the self-management, Paul, he had 60 to 80% correct responding with taking the tokens when he was supposed to reward himself, and Jack did it with 100%. Of course, there was some prompting with Jack. Very minimal prompting with Paul. During the second non-contingent phase of Paul, it was 40 to 60%, which yielded a higher rate as before. He was only at 20%, and 100% with self-managing of taking the tokens when he was supposed to monitor his own correct responding, and there was some prompting there. Jack had 100% prompting, not 100% prompting, but he self-managed his behavior by taking tokens 100% of the time with a verbal prompting. During the second non-contingent phase, he was back at 20%, and the self-management phase, he was also at 20%. So it tells me that Jack may need more training on how to use this intervention. Paul, he seems like he gets it. He understands the self-management. If I respond, socially interact, if I share a toy, then I get a token. And Stan, of course, he was able to catch on of how the self-management intervention actually worked. All in all, what's said to be said is that they all 3 did show some type of understanding of how to self-manage their particular behavior of socially responding when using this strategy. Now, what did this study really tell us about using self-management, and something that I would like to share with all of you? What it tells us is that delivery of reinforcement by students was more useful than adult providing tokens. In some cases, self-management doesn't always seem to be as important as the effectiveness of the procedure. Meaning, I could socially share a toy with another student, but I don't necessarily need to get a token because what I'm doing it appears to be right because someone is not telling me that it's wrong. And ultimately, that is our goal, is to actually get students that have autism to socially interact with other children. I'm not saying that self-management is not a good intervention. In this case, what do we want to do? Say it's not a great behavior, or you're not doing the correct behavior because you didn't give yourself a token, or apply them for actually doing the behavior that we want to see them do and generalize in other settings. Point number 3 tells us that continuous reinforcement is necessary when teaching self-management. And yes, when we see that a student is doing something and we want to continue to hone on those social skills, we want to reinforce the behavior. We want to say, good job. We want to say, okay, give yourself a high five, get a token. We want to tell them that they're doing something good, so this can be something that they will continue to do. In order to correctly determine if self-management is generalized, you must maintain a follow-up outside of the treatment, and that's something that needs to be, you eat it, you sleep it, you drink it. When you're providing a behavior plan for a child using self-management strategy or any other one of the packages, follow-up is always the necessity. You have to always do a follow-up. You have to always follow up to make sure that this is a strategy that is not only used in a setting that you're observing, but in other settings as well, to promote those social skills that we want these children to have throughout their life. The benefits. It can be differentiated to meet a wide range of students. And let me correct myself before I go any further. Down here in the left-hand corner, you see I quote, a title was quoted, Step by Step Teaching Students to Self-Monitor. This is another article that I actually read that was not just for children with autism, but it was an article that was written for a journal for exceptional children. And it was also to be used with all children across the board. It doesn't necessarily say that it had to be just used with children with autism, children with disabilities, children that have major behavior problems. It's a strategy that can be used to help a child. So less invasive than teacher managed strategies is also a benefit. Um, Another benefit is that may be more effective than teacher regulated interventions. I got tongue tied. When used correctly, students have higher levels of self-efficacy, motivation, and achievement, and can encourage students to self-manage a variety of behaviors. I also included this in the reference, so if you would like to go and reference this article and read it for yourself, it's a good read. I put it in my reference section at the end of this PowerPoint. The impact that this article and the research that I done on self-management interventions had on me. Self-management will impact my practice by conducting a research study on self-management to see how far we have come and compare them to interventions that have been successfully implemented. That is one of my goals. The study demonstrated a need to generalize interventions in multiple settings and provide maintenance after the study, so that is something to always keep in mind when completing research. By reading this study, it heightened my understanding on being proactive with students after teaching them a learned behavior. There needs to be ongoing follow-up of students who leave your care and strong advocates who are aware of the needs of the students. That follow-up is a necessity, like I mentioned prior. And I need to have a continuous base of colleagues and advocates who are resourceful and actively engaged in the profession. Now, these additional resources that I spoke of earlier is something that I thought that were interesting. You could look them up. I provided the title and the authors. Well, number one, applications of self-management to individuals with severe handicaps. It was a review. This is a review of self-management literature to identify replications and adaptations for practice and future research. Second one was using self-management to improve the reciprocal social convention of children with autism spectrum disorder. I want to say that we read this article. It was a choice for us to read this article during this class, but at any rate, this study was conducted with children between the ages of 4 and 14, and the children were verbal with the ability to reciprocate conversation. Now, I don't mean to be biased by any means, because all the researchers out there have very good research, have done research for years. But Dr. Munching, she's a professor at Southern Illinois University in Carbondale. She was my professor when I attended Southern Illinois University in 1995 to 2000, and she knows her stuff. She actually helped co-write this article that I provided for you next, assessing sufficient social exemplars for students with autism. I'm not saying that her articles are better than anybody else's articles, but that is a professor that's I personally know. She sat on the board for when I completed my thesis, and she's a great resource. She's very informative. She keeps up with the IDEA changes, what's going on in special education. She has a wealth of knowledge when it comes to individuals with disabilities. She knows the law. And this study focused on same age peers mediating conversation with other peers with and without autism and generalizing the behaviors in other settings. The last article also was co-wrote by Dr. Nancy Munching, my professor from SIU, and Simpson and Heflin. And it's entitled, has nothing to really do with self-management intervention, but it's an article that gives you updated information about what is going on with things in special education now. Its issues, policies, and recommendations for improving the education of learners with disabilities disorders. The reference article that I used to do my summary of, and hopefully give you some insight about self-management interventions with early childhood, is entitled Self-Management of Sharing of Three Preschoolers with Autism. And you can find this article in our library. You can look it up. You have access to it as a student. And the other article, Step by Step Teaching Students to Self-Monitor, that was the other article that I said was very useful for not only children with autism, but across the board, children with disabilities, children without disabilities. And it's also an article that you can find in our campus library at the University of Denver. Thank you. I hope you enjoyed this, and I take constructive criticism. So if you have anything that you would like me to know, you'd like to tell me, you can email me. Thank you for listening. Have a nice day.